WarsawJS.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Barbara, and I'm here at this very stage for the first time. So a little bit stressed, but I hope that you will enjoy my presentation. So I work here at Box. Although I'm based in Krakow, I often come here to Warsaw to join my team. So I'm a technical writer. For those who never heard of a technical writer before, we write documentation, any type of. But I focus on API documentation. I help our teams to create documentation for specifications. I also write them myself. I help to create tutorials, different developer documents, all that. I'm not a developer, so if you come here for a lot of code, this is gonna happen later. But I still hope that we're gonna have a little bit of fun together talking about API documentation and our documentation framework as well. Okay, it works, great. So here are the topics for today's presentation. I'm gonna start with a little bit of an overview of how we document APIs at Box. So what goes into the documentation, how it looks like, how is it built, stuff like that. Then we're gonna move to the documentation framework. And by framework here, I mean documentation tools. So we call it like that because there is a set of tools that we use. And we're gonna actually, discuss if the framework matches our needs, if it delivers, how we can improve it. And so basically this is gonna be about the doc framework and then the technical writer versus the framework. So what challenges do we have? And how we as technical writers may sometimes even improve some things. So let's just get to it. Starting from APIs at Box. This is a part of our API specification. This is how it looks like. A lot of information on one page. It's publicly available. So if you're interested, you can just find it at developer.box.com. And we've got several things here. So right over there, we've got all our endpoints listed, our resources, files, everything there. Then we've got the request examples, and these are actually not included in the spec. They come from our SDK team that generates them for us. So they are specifically tagged so they can basically land up in our documentation. And the request example, or the response example, sorry, that is also auto-generated. And of course, the endpoint itself with all its parameters. There's a small, I don't know how it works. I don't know if it has it does, but okay. There is a small button there that says try this API, and it allows you as a developer to try it out before basically you start playing with it using any other client or using the samples that we provide. Okay, so this is our page. We provide it in English, but we also have the Japanese version, which adds another layer of creating documentation or localizing it for the Japanese customers. So we don't only take care of the English version, but also, we don't write in Japanese, basically, as technical writers, but we make sure that all the information that we have in our spec, in our documentation as well, lands up here on this side in both languages. So this is the API reference that we have. And now I wanted to just talk a little bit about how the API spec, so basically a bunch of YAML files, goes through this very elaborate process and is rendered on our documentation side. So we have a process for that, actually, and it all starts with the developer team, right? So we've got the developer team that comes up with an idea for an API. So they think, okay, this is the new very nice API that we're gonna launch, or we've got some additions to the existing API, and we want to add it, we want to create a specification. We as technical writers help them do so. Before that, it was a little bit more complicated. So they just provided us with the input with particular endpoint data, parameters, everything, API. and we created the specification ourselves. So you may be familiar with auto-generating specifications from the code, but we actually need to write them. So we add a single part of a specification in a single YAML file. So we've got like a single YAML file for the endpoint, for the resource, for additional attributes, all that. And we put it all in the public API service repository where it basically sits. We've got the service as well that is deployed along with the API. So altogether, they just land in our repository. And when the spec is validated by us as technical writers and also by, well, the specific linters that we have, I will talk about it a little bit later, then it is built. We've got a Jenkins file for it, a Jenkins pipeline for it, and it's built into a single JSON file. And this file is moved to the OpenAPI repository, sits there, and then the whole fun starts. So we've got Netlify and Gatsby to render our documentation, build it and render. So Gatsby is the static site generator that takes all of our sources, API specs, the guides, the SDKs, everything that we have, and builds it using different plugins, for example, for Markdown, for the OpenAPI transforming, all of that. And then all the content, after being built and orchestrated by Netlify, it lands on our site, so it's deployed. The process is totally automatic, so whenever a piece of content comes in, so for example, we add another spec or we modify something in our documentation, the build starts, and then after a while, all the info like lands on the site. And of course, then the localization process starts. So we need our APIs localized, as I said. So we also have this localization process automatically started and in place. All the information goes to our localization team, then it's translated and comes back. So we've got like several processes here. It's not really that well simple when you look at it. Requires a lot of steps and a little bit of effort, but we try to automate it, of course. But the question is this whole process actually getting us what we want? And what do we want? So the developers, that's the first group that uses our documentation, right? So you as a developer, you have your app, so you have your developer account, your app, and you want to integrate it with Box, and you want to use the API. So you go to our documentation, it's there. You want to find and use specific instructions in order to use the API with your app. You want to use the sample, maybe search for some more guidance, so the related links, related docs, tutorials, and on. And try out the APIs as well, if possible, right? So that's what the developers are interested in. But we, as technical writers, we are like on a different side. So we need to update and build the API docs. So that's the process that I was talking about. Make sure no info is missing, because sometimes it just appears that some info is in the spec, but it magically disappears when we render it on the site. So that's not what we want, right? We need to check the schema structure every now and then to see if it's complete and if everything is rendered properly. So check the rendering as well. And the question is, does our framework actually has what it takes to provide us with all the necessary, all the necessary aspects and all the necessary tools that we then use to come up and to build proper documentation? So first of all, when it comes to validation, there's always this validation phase. So when the spec is ready, we need to validate it, because when it's not either when it's not complete or when it has some errors, then it just won't render. So the framework will say, no, it's not going to happen. So we use different linters to make sure that the content that we create is properly written and properly structured. So Markdown lint, that's a general linter for Markdown. We use it to check our links, the structure of the document, if anything is missing, and if everything is there, if the front matter is proper. So the overall work here is based on a Markdown file, and we use Spectre for API specifications. So here we can check, for example, if all parameters have examples and descriptions, if the operation ID of a particular endpoint is properly structured, if all the necessary information are there, if the types are correct. We've got several rules in Spectral, and we are adding some more, so it's also extendable. And of course, slint that you probably all know for the JavaScript. When it comes to build, we need to make sure that the build runs well smoothly, right? So it starts and it hopefully doesn't fail. This is what Netlify takes care of, but we are working very hard to automate this process even more. For example, a good addition would be having a really nice preview on a pull request, because right now, for the testing purposes, we use our staging environment, but it still requires pushing the documentation to the staging environment to see it. And a very nice addition would be a link that directs you right to the site whenever you commit new new things into your pull request, or even create the pull request, right? So that's the thing that we need to think about to optimize the way we are building our documentation. And of course, rendering, so the whole look and feel of the site. Here we need to make sure that, as I said, all the info is there, that it's structured properly, so it's not so none of the elements of the site are missing, because it happens as well. For example, we've got several groups of APIs, and if you don't tag them properly, then they don't appear on the site, right? So the site appears to be built properly, but actually it's missing some information. So all the complexity to take this documentation, to take this API spec and render it properly gives us a little bit of headache, but we are working on that. But every now and then we encounter some challenges, let's say. For example, missing parameters. As you can see, the description is in the spec. We've got the parameters, the description is there, but it's not rendered on the site. So we, when we came across this issue, actually we thought that, okay, everything is right, so the site is rendered, is working, right? But the parameter is not there, so there's no description. Why? And it actually turned out that we had a variable that was responsible for hiding the description when the enum value was just one item. So if there were like 2 or more, everything was just fine. But if it's just one, then the description just went missing. So that was one example. The second one, the extensibility of the framework. So when it was built, it was 4 years ago by a team that left the box, I think, then. So when we arrived then, and we just had to deal with the framework and with the doc tools, and we don't have any doc tools team, right? Sometimes there are doc tools team that support technical writers, but we don't have one. So we needed to take care of it ourselves. So for example, here we've got a union of two types. We've got a string and a number, and our framework was totally not prepared for that. So we used it. It's absolutely in line with what OpenAPI standard says, but it just wasn't rendered properly. It just shown the first type, and that was it. So it's like kind of misleading for our developers, right? Because it doesn't say that, okay, it's going to be either this or that. Of course, you can use documentation to just write about it, right? But it's not how we wanted to proceed with that. And the same with new parameter types that were added to the specification. So for example, here we've got the patterns, the pattern parameter. It wasn't there, so it's again a little bit misleading. It was just, added in the documentation that there is the pattern that you can use, but we thought that, okay, it's a good idea to just, take it and just add a new parameter in a specific place in our framework code. So, okay, these are the things that are challenges in everyday life of a ordinary technical writer. So what happens when a technical writer actually needs to fix the framework, right? So I told you already, I'm not a developer. So before I just go straight to my best idea, which is baking some cookies and then giving them to developers and saying, guys, help me, please. I just resorted to fixing the things myself. So what is the path actually? The path is identify the issue, obviously, like with the enum part, right? So we were just talking about that this description was hidden, right? So I just went through the documentation and I saw that, okay, there is the pattern here. So when we've got just one enum value, the description is not there. So something is actually, wrong here. And I just went into our parameters file. So just to basically dive right into the code and work on it myself. It turned out to be just one line of code to be fixed, and then it just worked properly. Why it was set up this way, nobody knows. Yeah, it was a little bit of trial and error because I'm just, starting to play with the framework and the way it is built, and there's a lot of code in it. And so I looked for resources, asked the developers how to approach some things, how to fix them. Now we are working, for example, on upgrading the whole framework Node version, which is also a little bit painful because it hadn't been done in years, I think. And yeah, so the review part is also there. So I just, follow the process of actually how I write documentation, but, more code oriented. And I think, like, for me as a technical writer, it's another level of development. So people associate sometimes technical writers with, this is the guy who fixes the typos. So I just wanted to make sure that it's really not that hard, and you can start doing things that like more code related. Of course, we are not developers, but at least we can try, right? And bonus thing here is to document it. So for other writers, right? So basically, you can document the process, and the other writers or anybody who approaches problems can fix them as well. And what the future holds for us, exciting. So we've got new user journeys that we want to add, new learning materials, and also we are thinking of adding some API versioning, which is going to be, I think, beautiful. It's going to be a whole new presentation, I guess, but it will for sure be an exciting journey. So hope you had fun with APIs. If you have any questions, just ping me now or later. Thank you so much.
You said this is your first time on the stage?
It's my first time on the stage, yeah.
Amazing. Wasn't she good?
Thanks.
Yeah. Very. Does anyone have any questions for Barbara? I'll go for the nearest one first. Hold on a second. Here you go.
So do you use end-to-end tests? Because your scenario is a very good use case for end-to-end tests, because you have input and you have output, and this way check your framework, which is in between.
Yeah, that's on our agenda, because right now, actually, to test it, you need to either run it locally or just push everything to staging. So I know that it's complicated, and we are working on that. So we've got like particular tests for separate parts. As I told you, we just taken over the framework recently, so it's still a kind of a difficult thing to grasp. But yes, we are thinking of that, and the automation as well.
Okay, so question, from my experience, either the documentation is auto-generated with Swagger 100%, or is usually it's going to be out of sync. So do you have some solutions for that?
Well, so for now, we also can auto-generate it from the JSON file and have the Swagger version of it. So that's also possible. But well, for now, we just monitor it closely to make sure and cooperate with the teams that are creating APIs to make sure that it is kind of not out of date. So yeah, but it's a good point. It's a valid point that yeah, parts of it should be maybe auto-generated because yeah, it's also related to the guides and to the other parts of documentation. So we need to think how to fit it all in so that it's like even if it's auto-generated, it fits with the other elements on the site. But yeah, for now it's rather a kind of documentation / manual process.
2 more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. First one, two, 1 and 2.
Just make it one.
Okay.
Put a
So
comment.
the more important. OpenAPI does not support localization. It is support multiple language versions out of the box. Do you use extensions or do you store your translated text somewhere else outside of the
We
scheme?
use another team. So it happens. We have a localization team. So when everything is done and merged, then the localization process assumes creating snapshots. So I think every couple of days we create snapshots of what is there in our documentation. Then it's sent to the localization team, they localize it and then push it back to the Japanese branch. So we just localize one language right now, and this is done externally. It's an automatic process. So whenever something comes up, it is translated, but we kind of like outsource it right now.
Thank you, Barbara, for your presentation. It was really interesting. And my question is, do you use ChatGPT in your job and how?
Isn't the last presentation about it? Yeah, you can use, well, as a technical writer, when this whole ChatGPT thing arrived, we were like, is it gonna replace us? Because that's the question that every tech writer like asks themselves. So basically, you can use it, for example, to like summarize something, verify your documentation. If you have problems with the code, you can also ask it if you don't have a developer at hand. So I think it is helpful in the technical writer's job for sure, but we don't use it right now in our documentation. Like it's not there actually, but we can use it in our for several things, I would say. Yeah, you can even ask it if your documentation makes sense. Yeah.
Pani Barbara.
Okay, that's it.
No. We can have more. If we have another question, we can take it. Anyone?
I was waiting.
Of course, Danielle. No, we're going to switch the. Go ahead. We can switch the screen though, folks. Because of the audio, let's say, environment, it would be nice if you would speak very closely to the microphone, and also please try to remember to separate your words. Otherwise, speaking phrases no one's saying. That's what I'm saying. Okay, thank you.
Does this documentation pipeline support GraphQL-based APIs?
Well, I would have to check that. That's a good question because for sure it's there. So we have the GraphQL there, but I would have to check actually if it does because we just rely on REST APIs right now. But that's a valuable question, I would say. I just have to check. Yeah.
Okay, now everyone, please. I just want to try to get some energy back because Barbara, first presentation, that was amazing. Was she not great? We're looking. Yeah, no, that was really excellent. She said she was nervous. You delivered. I heard every word that you said. Barbara, thank you very, very much. We look forward for more from you in the future. That was awesome. That was awesome. All right, folks.